Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world when you see this. Don Norcross here, and welcome to our first podcast on drones, or as somebody has suggested, the Dronecast. Because if you live in New Jersey, parts of New York, it has certainly been the rage. It has been talked about from the White House to Saturday Night Live and everything in between. So we want to just have a conversation today. Obviously, we've received so many phone calls from people in my district asking us, what do we know? What's going on? So we're going to start to explain what we know, what we don't know, and what we hope to know in the future. So the one thing I do want to say is I understand your concern. We might have some answers that will help alleviate it. We might not answer everything, but I want you to understand that we are being transparent with what we know, what we understand, and quite frankly, what we might not know at this point. So at the end of this podcast, we're going to have one more talking about the ways that drones are detected and, as we call, disrupted, if we want to do that. Since the sightings began, and as late as yesterday, I was on a White House briefing for the second time. And in there, we're hearing from the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the Federal Aviation Administration, our governor from the state of New Jersey, the colonel from the state police. At this point, the consensus is that some people are seeing what we will describe as drones. Others are seeing both private and commercial aircraft, whether it's a fixed wing or a rotary, meaning a helicopter. Some of it can be by law enforcement. You know, we have 500 plus municipalities in New Jersey, and I'd venture a guess that every municipality, whether it's law enforcement or the town itself, has a drone. What's incredible is there are close to 1 million drones that are registered here today. So I understand why you're concerned. You're looking up there and saying, what is going on? And we'll talk a little bit more about why more at night in the last couple of years. But first, I'm honored to introduce to you a guest, that Michelle Hanlon, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Air and Space Law at the University of Mississippi and the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Drone Law and Policy. Michelle, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an important topic, and I'm just so thrilled to see offices like yours turn your attention to it.
Right, and I've been in a number of briefings, as I mentioned. I've seen people talk about it on TV. There's people talking about foreign countries. So there's a lot of information out there. What we're going to start to do today, with your help, is sort of explain from the basics of ground up, starting with, what the hell is a drone? What does that mean to the average person? But I do want to say, for those who are listening, follow me on Instagram at Donald Norcross. We'll post this along with any questions. Send them in to us for our next podcast, and certainly would appreciate it. I do want to apologize ahead of time for my voice. I'm at the back end of laryngitis, and you can imagine how difficult that is. So, Michelle, let's start from the basic. What is a drone?
So I have to preface this by saying I'm a lawyer, and we love our definitions. So when we think about a drone, it's really anything that's uncrewed, anything that has either a remote pilot or is autonomous. And so we have drones that work like submarines, right? Uncrewed submarines, anything that is remotely controlled. The Federal Aviation Administration uses the term unmanned aircraft system. And so when we're thinking about the things that your constituents are seeing over the skies of New Jersey, we're talking about uncrewed aircraft. So any kind of aircraft, whether it's rotary or fixed wing, which doesn't have a pilot in it. And we'll see in legal terms, we're going to hear UAS, unmanned aviation system, or RPAS, remotely piloted aviation system.
So when we talk about that, now where I live, we have Philadelphia International Airport. There's a ton of regional airports around New Jersey we have Trenton, we have North, Morris County. They're all over. And when you look up in the sky, particularly at night, and we hear this quite often, it's kind of hard to see which way is that going, how's it coming at me, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for the average person, and as I understand the drones, they classify them as type and sort of the weight or the size of these. So drones come very tiny little things that you could fly in your house, up to the ones that you see in many of the views we're getting from Ukraine that are unpiloted and used for mass destruction of people and buildings. But for the average person, gee, I'd like to take some pictures. I think it would need to have a drone. What's the legal requirements you need in order for somebody to own or operate a drone?
So the Federal Aviation Administration, which is part of the Department of Transportation, regulates drones that are in from 0.55, so from a half a pound to 55 pounds. And there's a whole entire regulation, Part 107, which talks about what you can do if you have a drone that size. So when you're talking about those very small drones that you can fly around in your house, you're fine, because it's probably not 0.55 pounds. But if you have something larger, if you want to take a picture of something, if you think, oh, I'm going to go take the fall foliage, then you are regulated by the FAA. The FAA says, okay, if you are a commercial drone operator, you need to have a license. You need to go through the licensing process at the FAA. And commercial, mind you, doesn't mean that you're getting paid. It means that you're using, like if you're doing it as a favor to your real estate buddy, taking pictures of a house, that's considered commercial. So if you're doing anything like that, you need an actual license. If you are truly just a hobbyist, you just bought a drone and you just want to go up and down in your backyard, you can do that by just taking what's called the Trust Safety Test issued by the FAA. So you don't need an actual license, but you just take this test. And primarily that tells you things like you can't go above a certain limit, you can't get too near an airport. And importantly now, you have to register your drone, whether you're a total hobbyist or a commercial drone operator, that drone needs to be registered with the FAA.
Because somebody who purchases a drone, the question comes out is, how do we know who they are? Well, if you're doing it illegally, you're probably not putting out a signal telling you who you are. But talk to me about the frequency or how they can tell who you are from that drone if you have the right equipment to detect it.
So it's called remote identification. And when you have something that's autonomous or that is remotely piloted, you need that radio frequency. And every radio frequency has its own identification system. It's very easy to sort of pick out the radio frequency that you're using. And the point of registering the drone is that when somebody with the proper equipment can figure out what frequency that drone is on, then you can go back into the registration, go to the FAA and say, this is the drone that we're tracking. And the FAA says, oh, that matches with this registration ID.
Yeah, it's a great point, because when we think in 2D, the way that we operate each and every day, a car has a license plate. We can identify them. But the one thing that I tell people is, even though it has a license plate, it doesn't make it that car. People who want to do things illegally could put a different plate on it. And that's sort of the issue that we're going to be running into, because when many of the laws with drones were originally built in terms of coming from Congress, technology has changed. People have learned how to do these things. They can be very helpful, but they also can create quite a bit of havoc. We'll talk about a little bit later on, the idea of a privately operated drone that we're discussing. And by the way, when you say you have to register, if you think of an apple, that's about the weight of 250 grams of when you have to start getting these licenses. So for those who are watching that, it's about the size of an apple. The teeny ones we're not concerned about. But over the last couple of days, we've heard quite a bit coming in on no-fly zones. Now, no-fly zones have been a part of the FAA for years. You don't fly over parts of Washington. You don't fly over nuclear plants. You don't fly over certain installations. But How can you tell if you're a drone operator, if you're in a no-fly zone? Or what they just announced yesterday, there's 22 additional sites across the state of New Jersey that are now temporary no-fly zones.
So this is exactly the issue. We expect our drone operators to be responsible. And so it is up to you as the drone operator to go onto the FAA website and see where there are no-fly zones, federally imposed no-fly zones. One of the rules about flying a drone is that you have to keep it within your visual line of sight. And so you will also see, I'm sure many people have seen sort of the no-fly zone signs that the FAA will issue. What compounds this, however, is that you can also have local ordinances. So you're going to have to check with your town and your county and the state to see where you have no-fly zones. Many states have no-fly zones over their state parks, for example. And so this is something that you can check in your local ordinances.
And that's part of the FAA. I was looking at the website. It's to go in there. Now, they're not going to have your local, or
Correct.
in many cases a state, but you'll have to do that on your own. But in terms of these sites, for instance, in New Jersey, in our district area, there are close to 5 areas that they have set aside for flying. You know, the old model aircraft, they have those areas around. So those are literally fly zones. But recently you've heard that there are no fly zones every airport, because obviously that can be extremely disruptive or even deadly. What other sort of restrictions does the average person need to know when they go to fly? Hey, can I fly into somebody's backyard and look in their window? What else should the owner and operator of a drone know before they take it outside and start flying it?
So the FAA has some very straightforward restrictions. You cannot fly over people unless those people know that you're flying over them. So you cannot fly at night. You cannot fly beyond the visual line of sight. You have to have that drone in your vision at all times. And you can't operate more than one drone at a time. So those are your FAA restrictions. However, when we look at, okay, I want to go up and maybe I'm going to go over in my neighbor's backyard when I'm trying to get that beautiful shot of the lake or see the lake, then you're going to unfortunately have to go look at your local ordinances. A lot of states and localities, they don't necessarily have drone laws, but they have privacy laws. So if you are flying a drone and you're going across your neighbor's property, you might be violating a privacy law. Certainly, if you're using it to hover and watch somebody in their house, that's going to be a violation of their privacy. So unfortunately, we have sort of this patchwork of understandings from the local level. You have to go to your town and county and state and see what laws might be implicated. There are a lot of drone hobbyists out there who publish these things on websites so that it's very easy to see. But fundamentally, keep it within your visual line of sight. Don't fly at night. Don't fly over people.
So when we look at when drones first came about for the mass public and where we are today, huge differences. And you will hear Amazon wants to start delivering packages. So this is only going to get more complicated. So the idea of what we have to do as the lawmakers is to take a reassessment of what's going on, because people are clearly concerned on what's going on down there. And one of the issues, there's many people making statements across the board, both private citizens and some of my colleagues. What I want to suggest in the strongest of terms is don't take the law into your own hand and start shooting up into the sky, because that's when things can really get complicated, because we don't know what that drone has with it. Is it parked gasoline? Are there some sort of nefarious items in there that they're trying to distribute? Prisons have had trouble for years with these drones flying over and dropping drugs into the courtyard for them to run out and get. When does the average homeowner who sees this drone dropping down and into their backyard, when can they take action, if ever?
Not, I mean, I can only use self-defense laws, right? It's your stand your ground kinds of laws, because you cannot shoot it down. And I want to just reiterate and strengthen what you just said. You cannot shoot that down. A drone, an uncrewed aircraft, is considered an aircraft. And so all of the laws that protect airplanes are protecting those drones, even if they're tiny, even if they're annoying, even if they're hovering in your backyard. You cannot shoot it down. That is a violation of the law. So what can you do? Well, I mean, we've talked about this is what the FAA is trying to do with this remote ID and being able to identify frequencies and calling your local law enforcement. But of course, we even see then that that's not exactly local law enforcement doesn't have the capability of shooting it down either. We're talking about violating wiretap laws, because this is a radio frequency that you're tapping into. Even if you're just trying to, sort of interfere with them, that's against the law. So as the average homeowner, you see that drone hovering outside, you call your local law enforcement. Even if it's to fall into your yard, you do not have the right to destroy it. You can turn it over to the police as evidence, but don't stomp on it. Don't bring the sledgehammer on it, because that is considered an aircraft, and that would violate the destruction of aircraft law.
Yeah, obviously you want to feel safe, and that's why we're having this very frank discussion on the things you can and can't do. So over the course of the last couple of weeks, obviously New Jersey has been sort of the hotspot, and quite frankly, it's been the northern half of the state where the vast majority of reports are going on. Some have been over the ocean. We can talk openly that we have moved, when I say we, the government, federal government, has moved additional assets into the state to try to detect. But the one thing that they've done, and I'd love to hear your view on this, there are apps that you can get right on your phone that can tell you and show you the flight path of commercial airliners. Mm-hmm. And what they are finding is that in many cases, it's very difficult to figure out what's up in the sky. So if you were to take what I'll call a deer hunting rifle, 30-06, not only are you shooting at something that you're not sure what it is, it could be a commercial passenger airliner. And then that bullet has to come down somewhere. And that's lethal if that hits you. So this is as frustrating, and I understand as it must be, to say, I'm scared of that thing. You have to take that into account. And that's what we are going to listen to, the concerns of the public, because safety comes first, and try to mold our new laws around that. Now, just as an FYI, if we do not continue the government in operation, the authorities for counter UAS or the drones will cease to exist, with the exception of some of those in the defense or the airport areas. That is not good. So in addition to all the reasons we should keep government operating, these are the little details that count. So you see something, you call the police up, let's just say they get there right away. Do the police, local police, have the understanding of what they are and are not allowed to do? And when can they get involved into what is perceived to be a safety issue with a drone?
So this is exactly the kind of question that we're looking at here at the Drone Law and Task Force in Mississippi. We need a huge awareness raising campaign, because police don't know what they can and cannot do. These laws aren't trickling down, and it's not like every time a law passes, you wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, okay, something new I have to read." And so this is an issue, and also it's an issue because drones can be very good for police forces as well, right? I mean, you can use drones. Drones can be first responders. I mean, how many times do you hear about the drone that found the missing child using, thermal signatures? So no, the police generally don't know what they can do. They have been, I think, probably in New Jersey, certainly briefed that they cannot either shoot it down. Now, Congress has in 2018, for the very first time, issued those counter UAS, counter drone rules, and made it very clear for the reasons you said, sir, that it is dangerous to shoot something out of the sky. The Federal Aviation Administration is in charge of keeping our national airspace safe, and they've done a really good job of that. So before we start saying, we need to worry about these drone incursions, we do, but we want to keep in mind safety first. So the local law enforcement right now has to, if there is an issue, has to turn to the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Transportation. There are a handful of agencies in the federal government who have the right to shoot these down, who have the capability to make judgment calls to determine, okay, that's not a commercial airliner, that's not a private plane. Yes, we are going to take these matters into our own hands, and the system is working in New Jersey, as far as I can tell. Right? You've been briefed. The White House has been briefed. People are talking about this. The federal government is responding. Are they responding fast enough? Probably not for your constituents. It's scary. But remember, again, the remit of our federal government is to keep us and our national airspace safe. And so at this point in time, while we're still trying to figure out how we can monitor drones, how we can give local law enforcement the tools that they need, we need to step very carefully.
So when we look at where a drone generally can operate, assuming we're outside of the no-fly zones, the 400-foot level is generally the height that they're allowed to go. So for those who are listening, that's about a 40-story building. That's pretty tall, but from an aviation standpoint, it's not very tall. The reason they do that, they want to keep the skies available for the airliners. And just as we saw up in New York, when the geese flew into the engines, if these get flown into the engine, the same thing will happen, is they could absolutely disrupt. So they want to keep the drones outside of that. And on our next podcast, we're going to talk about how do we detect and how do we disrupt? Because we say shoot them down, we're thinking kinetic, a bullet. But there are many ways that we can disrupt a drone, an autonomous vehicle. Some that we will be able to talk about and some that are classified. But certainly drones are here to stay, whether we like them or not. But I think it's important to know what they are and what they're not. And certainly, Michelle, what you're bringing to us is the idea of what are the limits that we can do now? What's legal, what's not allowed? Any last thoughts that you want to leave with our listeners?
Oh, yes, thank you. I would just say, drones are good for the most part, and we're seeing some really promising uses of the technology for everything from saving lives because you're not sending your inspectors somewhere to organ deliveries, getting that heart to a child without having to deal with traffic. So as menacing as you might feel with the drones that you're seeing now, remember that there are drones for good, and this is a technology that we can harness to better humanity.
That's a great way to wrap things up. But just like cars on the road have to be licensed and we have to do a little bit more on the electronic side. So those locally understand what is up there and what isn't. So Michelle, thank you very much for taking a few minutes. It's great to have you here, and thank you for listening. And we'll let you know when the Detect and Disrupt podcast is coming up. Thank you.
Thank you.